All right, here we are. We've come together through asynchronous time and the ether net. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. If you're new, welcome, and just thanks to everyone for choosing to listen. My guest today is Leana Marie, and she's going to talk to us about Corepower yoga and Black Lives Matter. And I'm going to tell you more about her and today's conversation in just a bit. But first, I'm in need of a check-in. Longtime listeners know that this happens every once in a while on the show. And if you are new around here and you're not interested in me spouting off on some stuff, then maybe you want to just skip ahead. But I had a week that just floored me. I had a day this week where I broke down emotionally in a way that I just haven't in a long time, if only a few times in my life. And it started out fine, like the week began on a real up note. First, we had a birthday party in the park with several other parents we hadn't seen in a long time, and it was all very socially distanced and respectful, and it was kind of great. It was a really good time, and it was a little weird, but still fun. And I was super happy to feel like, okay, a little semblance of our fellow humanity and friends and not just being cooped up at home. And then I had my first in-person class where one person came to one of my classes in Allentown, and she contacted me before and asked me about it. And of course, there was this whole negotiation that had to happen. I talked to my wife about it. I had to think about whether or not it was okay and what the protocols that we were going to use were. And we ended up doing it. And you know what? That felt pretty great too. Felt good. And I felt, we're going to get through this. That was the feeling I had. And then the state that I live in, here in Pennsylvania, announced the guidelines they were putting forth for reopening the schools this coming year. And they put out these very general guidelines for the whole state, but individual school districts do end up making decisions for their school district as to what the plan is and what's going to be happening with your kid's school. So at first, a neighboring school district of ours announced what they were going to do. And what they were doing was to basically put a choice to the parents of either totally remote learning, completely online, or going to school, like not a hybrid, like it's one or the other. And then the protocols for going to school were pretty loose. It said something about masks, but it didn't seem like it was required. It seemed kind of like masks optional. And I don't know, there was this moment where if our district decides to do the same thing as this neighboring district, what would we do? And I was really leaning towards them going back to school because I'm really not a big fan of all this remote learning that's been going on. But then, you see, right now, I've been talking about my eldest daughter. If you've been around, you've heard me talking about her. Well, right now, her whole life is this one friend. She's got a best friend. And I don't know if you remember when you were 10 and you had a best friend. It's like, that's her whole life, this friend. And we really like her parents. We really see eye to eye on a lot of things, and we really like them. And we opened up our pods together. I talked about that recently, about my daughter seeing her friend. Well, this is the friend, right? And when we talked to them, they were leaning the other way. They were feeling like they didn't think it was feeling safe to send their kids back to school, and they were probably going to opt to not send them back. And then it dawned on me, wait a second. If we decide to send our daughter back to school and they don't, they're probably not going to want their daughter to play with our daughter because now they'll be exposing them to the very reason they're not sending them to school. And so I felt like, wait a second, this isn't just a decision about whether or not I think it's reasonable risk or whether or not I think it's okay or safe to send them back to school. It's also a decision about potentially whether or not my daughter's going to get to be able to see her best friend. And I just lost it. I melted down. I don't know how to handle that. Fortunately, my district did announce their plan, which wasn't the same. And it's a much better plan, I'm happy to say. It's based on numbers, and the state has this whole color system of phases, green phase 1, 2, 3, the reopening, and it's according to how many cases and deaths and what the recommendations are. And so they do have all of these protocols in place. They're going to do like 2 days a week at school and 3 days remotely. And we had already been talking with some other parents about potentially ways of doing something on those 3 days of remote learning where the kids aren't all on screens, like maybe even some collective parent-to-parent homeschooling alongside their teachers. So I don't know, that was really intriguing to me, and I was feeling like, okay, that's possible, we could do that. And they have all these protocols at school. But all of this could change in a week or a day. And what I realized is that the reason why I'm feeling like I want my kids to go back to school is because there's so many things that I remember that I had. My eldest daughter's going to middle school for the first time. She just finished elementary school. And do you remember what that was like? Riding the bus for the first time? Like, I have this like emotional idea about what I was hoping she was going to get to experience this year. We were kind of excited, and it was this fun time in her life. And now she's just going to be home and not be able to play with her best friend. But you see, then I realized, but wait a second, you see, it's not going to be what I have, this romantic idea. It's going to be distanced, it's going to be one-way hallways and plexi and everybody masked, and it's not going to be the romantic thing I had. It's going to be something else. There's probably going to be kind of like a lot of anxiety to it, maybe. Like it's not going to feel normal to anybody. At least not at first. So I don't know. I imagine there's a bunch of other people listening to this who have kids who are facing a lot of the same situations. And maybe you don't have kids, maybe you don't care about any of this, but it's just, it's just totally fucked up. That's what it is. It's just totally fucked up. Forgive me, but it is. And I was struggling. And I imagine I'm not the only one. And if you are struggling, if you're having a hard time too, I think my saving grace was just love and friendship. I mean, it sounds cheesy, but it's true. Just love of my wife and friendship, people who are practicing with me, and just having people to be with, even if it's remotely, even if it's just through fucking Zoom. Speaking of which, guess what? We discovered a thing in our teacher's call this week, by the way, called Hide Self View. If you weren't familiar with that, which I didn't even know existed, if you click on that little 3 dots up in the upper right corner, you usually have this option to hide self view, where you don't see yourself. You just see everybody else. And you know what? It's way better. Try it. See for yourself. It feels way better. In any case, I did have other people that I could talk to. I didn't feel alone in it, and that was everything. So, I don't know. If you're feeling alone, maybe you can find someone that you can talk to. And I am very happy to have this show as a reason for me to talk to people. And today I'm talking to Leana Marie. And I didn't know Leana at all. One of you, the listeners, sent me an email saying, hey, you should check out this Instagram account. Leana Marie's been writing about what's happening at Corepower Yoga. And maybe you remember, some weeks back, I had my friend Mel Russo on, and she was telling us what happened with Yoga Works in New York when the pandemic hit and how she was trying to work from within to help better the situation there for the teachers before everything happened. Well, basically, Leana Marie's the same story, but with Corepower and with this whole Black Lives Matter angle on it. So I reached out to her and we had a conversation on the fly, and I think it's interesting and informative, and I'm glad you're going to get to hear it today. Real quick before we do, let me mention today's sponsor, Karmasoft. And if you've been a long-time listener, then you know Karmasoft because I talk about them all the time. They've been with us longer than anyone else. And if you're a studio manager or owner, or you're starting something new and you're putting together your systems of how you're going to register for classes and how you're going to do your payroll, and maybe you don't want to use MindBody Online, then I think you really want to check out Karmasoft. It's the software that I used when I had my yoga center in Brooklyn. The owner of that company, Rudy Senegal, he's been on the show. You can go back and listen to the episode. It's an always free episode back in the archive. You can go back and listen to it. He's somebody I think will really work with you, especially right now. He's got solutions for people that can be individualized to you. You can reach out to them and they'll help you. So maybe now's the time to do yourself the favor and check out Karmasoft. Go to karmasoftonline.com. Also, this episode is brought to you in support by Podcast Premium subscribers, Andrea Lodico and Chris Taylor. We have been shouting out our Podcast Premium subscribers these days because we are incredibly grateful to them. If you weren't familiar with Podcast Premium subscription, you get full access to the archives and you help support this show. It choose your rate, and if you can't afford anything, then you just email us and we give you a free account. But it's really the best way to help keep us doing this every week. And we're very grateful to Andrea and Chris and all the rest of our subscribers. To find out more about becoming a Podcast Premium subscriber, or learn about my online classes or the Teacher's Call or any of my stuff, go to jbrownyoga.com. Okay, I think that's good. I will touch base with you on the other side. But for now, let's go ahead and listen to this conversation that I had with Leana Marie.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Hi, Leana. Is that how you say your name? Leana?
That is how you say my name, yes.
All right, cool. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
I'm all right. Everything's okay?
Everything's good. Everything's good, yes.
Are you situated? You can sit down? You have some time to talk?
Absolutely. Yes.
Very cool. Well, thanks for giving me your time. I really appreciate that. We don't know each other at all, and I just reached out, and I appreciate you, letting me have some time to talk with you today.
Thank you so much for your time and even reaching out. I really appreciate you so much.
No, really. My pleasure. I often will sort of say to listeners of the show, hey, if there's anybody you think I should talk to, just, let me know. And somebody reached out to me and said, you should talk to Leana. And I think that's because the people who listen to the show know that there's a couple threads I follow. And a few weeks ago, I had my friend Mel Russo on. And she's somebody who kind of had an in at Yoga Works when the pandemic hit. And she was kind of working from the inside to try to improve conditions there, the culture there for the teachers. Mm-hmm. We had a whole conversation about that. And over the years, whenever I've talked about like the big scaled models of yoga, which I've sometimes railed against, I usually have cited like Yoga Works and Corepower. I'm just gonna be honest. I gotta have like full disclosure in the front. Like I have totally hated on Corepower in the past.
That's okay. That's okay. I think everyone has had their moments or their time or a disagreement with Core Power and how they operate.
Well, what I would say is a couple years ago, I had somebody on the show who had done Core Power training. And he pretty much dispelled me of it, because when I actually took a look at like what they do and some of the things there, I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like I had given them, I hadn't given them a fair look.
Okay.
But I would say that there has always been some kinds of issues for me personally. Like I had a center for 10 years. Whenever you have like, like a big corporation, whenever the structure has that kind of, like you don't know the person who signed your check personally. Like there's a central office.
Yeah.
That's like a very different situation when it comes to like yoga teachers developing what they do, or having a place to teach. And I have learned over the years that there's good and bad to both, to both the corporate stuff and the non-corporate stuff.
Absolutely.
And the reason why somebody, I think, reached out to me to talk to you is because, as I understand it, you've been involved with Core Power for some years and have been involved in a similar way to trying to change things there. And I know some recent stuff happened.
Yes.
So I guess I'm curious, maybe just to start, what's your history with Core Power? Like, was Core Power your first yoga home, or did you have like other previous yoga incarnations before you landed at Core Power?
Yeah, so I actually started yoga. I'm from Mississippi, so I'm from a very small town in Mississippi. Okay. So I started practicing yoga after I was in a car accident, and I started at this really small studio in Jackson, Mississippi, and I loved it. And I was like, man, this is so great, and I want to be able to share this with other people. But at the time, my spouse was in the military, so I had to move to Hawaii. And I moved to Hawaii, and that's when I found and landed in Core Power Land. I got there, my first couple of days, I went to the studio and like literally was just like, I love this place. This is where I want to do teacher training. Everyone here in Hawaii, they were so nice. And I was just like, this is it. I'm going to do it. And so, yeah.
I'm sorry. Did you say that you were in Mississippi before you went to Hawaii? Did you do any yoga before you went to Hawaii, like in Mississippi? I'm sorry if I missed that.
Yeah. So no. Yeah. I was just practicing in Mississippi at the time. I was just going to a really small studio at the time and just practicing and being in that environment. And I was loving the experience, and I really wanted to complete teacher training, but I had to move at the time. And so that's when I moved to Hawaii and found Core Power.
Well, I guess I'm just curious, like, what year was that? How many years ago was that when you were in Mississippi?
This was in I was born and raised in Mississippi, but I moved in 2014 to Hawaii.
All right. So, but what was yoga like in Mississippi before you left? What was that center like?
That center was, let's see, I would always be the only Black student there. And
that's kind of what I was asking about. I was sort of curious, was in Mississippi where you grew up, was there more integration or less?
Yeah. It was the same. It was just very white, and it was a very white studio, but everyone was still kind. I still got looks when I went in. People were very confused as to why I was there, I guess. And they would, give me looks while I was in class because, I have a dance and cheerleading background. So of course, like yoga wasn't like, it was hard in senses of ways, but like I was very flexible and I was able to keep up with class and, do the things they were doing. So they were looking at me like, wow, giving me those looks like, I can't believe she's here. So it was kind of, I'm used to it, which is sad. I'm so immune to this type of behavior. It was like nothing for me. So yeah, it was the same. Just I would always be the only Black student in the class, or, this is very used to being the only Black student.
And do you think that's was it because there wasn't other Black people where you lived, or is there some reason why you think you're interested in yoga that makes you interested in yoga? Like,
I don't know. Well, I wouldn't say that it wasn't the area, because I lived in a very, area where there were Black people. There were lots of Black people there, and there were lots of white people. I'm not sure. I know oftentimes when people of color, Black people, walk into spaces, we oftentimes don't feel welcome, because I would literally go to yoga and then go to the gym, which was like like a block around the corner from the gym, and it would be full of Black people there. And so I was just, I'd be curious as, to just, think that we aren't really welcome into these types of spaces. And so it makes it difficult for us to go into these types of spaces. And in doing this whole thing and being a part of this movement, I realized that I am not the only person that would constantly feel that way, into walking into yoga studios, into boutique fitness studios, and oftentimes not feel welcome and not feeling seen and heard in those types of spaces.
But you went in.
I went in, I went in and I was like, I'm determined. The doctor at the time that I was seeing, he was like, you need to try yoga. I couldn't really do anything. I was really hurt, and I was like, I was iffy to try it, but also I was trying to like keep myself in shape and, kill my back and my neck injury that I got. So, I was like, I'm gonna keep pushing, because I was raised to always, keep pushing. I went to a predominantly white high school, so being the only Black person in something wasn't my first experience there. That wasn't then. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess you had a dance background too. Sometimes that's an into yoga as well. And yoga,
Absolutely.
like yoga helps. Like when you do it, it feels good. So I guess you had a passion for it early on.
I did, yep. So my cheerleading and dance background definitely helped, and like I felt like I just grew up and built to be able to conquer things like that. As I said, I went to a predominantly white high school. It was just like a handful of Black students, and being involved with cheerleading and dance, I was oftentimes the only Black person. So walking into spaces like that, feeling like I'm the only one, wasn't new for me at all.
All right, but when you were in Hawaii, you went to Corepower, and was that different? Did that have a different feel than the center back in Mississippi?
Well, Hawaii is a little more diverse. It's like a sprinkle of kind of everybody in Hawaii, and the local people there are so nice, and they're so accepting, especially of black people. So when I walked in, I immediately felt welcome. Everyone at the front desk was just very nice and very welcoming, and it felt like a very safe space to be in.
The spirit of aloha, right?
Absolutely. It was so that. And, when I became a teacher and started teaching, like I had a following, and they were just so great. And they were just like, it felt like home. I felt like home in Hawaii.
All right. So did you start as a teacher, like through the training program there? I read somewhere that you were a manager there. Did you teach first or did you manage first?
Yeah, so I did teacher training, and then I was like, I'm a shy person, so I was like, I don't really want to teach. So I started I took on a retail role at Corepower. I was one of the retail specialists, and then I was like, well, I guess I'll start teaching. And I did another program, and I started teaching, and then about a little bit after that, I became an assistant manager because they were phasing out the retail roles, and so I became an assistant manager at the Ward Studio. And they phased out the retail role that I was in, and so I was in that role, and it was great. It was hard work. It was lots of hours, lots of work, and there was a lot of leadership.
I'm sorry, is that a salary gig?
It is a salary gig. Yeah, it is absolutely. Yeah. It's a salary gig in Hawaii, and all of the ASM and the studio manager role, those are salary gigs. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So you got to see how the place runs. See, I've been on both sides. I was a teacher, and then I was a yoga center owner, but it was like a sole proprietor, like I did everything situation. And,
Goodness,
and it's crazy. And I know that it's interesting to see a center from that perspective. So you got to see it from a managerial point of view.
Yes, I got both sides. I got the instructor side, and then I got the managerial side, and it's very eye opening. And I learned a lot, from being a manager in Hawaii, and it was an awesome experience. I got to mentor and teach a lot of people, and reached a lot of people, which was very rewarding for me. And then my time in Hawaii had come up, so it was time for me to. I transferred to the Atlanta market. In Atlanta, Georgia.
And so I'm curious about that. Like, were you feeling good about the company and your job there enough that you wanted to transfer, that they were willing to do that for you, which is pretty cool?
Yeah, so I was feeling good. I was super excited to get to Atlanta because, Atlanta is so rich and full of culture and just a super diverse city. And I was like, I'm so excited. I wasn't able to stay in my assistant studio manager role, but I took on a role as an instructor and a studio assistant, which is very different from assistant studio manager to studio assistant. Studio assistants aren't on salary. They work hourly, and also I was teaching. So I was teaching and took on a studio assistant role at a studio in Atlanta initially when I first got here. And then eventually when I got to Atlanta. And then after that, I became a studio manager once a position opened up for me to be a studio manager.
All right. And so do you teach classes and manage at the same time, or do you have to choose one hat or the other?
No. So as a manager, you wear all the hats. The minimum classes you are asked to teach are 4 to 5 classes a week. If the toilets are overflowing, you are unclogging toilets. You are responsible for people's pay. You are a therapist. You are just a lot of things, and you have to wear all these hats. You're a teacher. You have to be able to mentor and train people, and it's just so many things and so many moving parts as a studio manager. And it's rewarding, but it's also very, very draining. And I found going from one region to another region, it was like night and day.
Okay, so what changed?
What changed? So I got to Atlanta, and Atlanta was a fairly new market. There, I believe that they had just recently opened a couple locations within like the year that I arrived. So it was very new and still growing, and I was just coming into, I would say, all kinds of madness. When I got here, the teachers were they seemed to be very unhappy, and the Black teachers were oftentimes overlooked, and they weren't happy as to how they were being treated, and I'm just like, wow, like I didn't get this when I was in Hawaii. Like, it was all love in Hawaii. And when I got to Atlanta, I was dealing with different area leaders and different regional directors, and I was just like, I don't really understand how this region is being operated. My immediate supervisor, we oftentimes didn't see eye to eye, and it was just a stressful environment to be in. I was literally could not thrive. I was literally just trying to survive in Atlanta.
I mean, that they had Black teachers, though. Like, a lot of places don't have any Black teachers at all, but you said that you felt like the Black teachers when you got there were not being treated the same as the other teachers?
Yeah, and it was a handful out of 5 studios, I would say, and out of so many teachers, I would say you could count the Black teachers on one hand, maybe 2. And it wasn't that many. Literally, it wasn't that many. And the studio that I managed in Atlanta was called North Druid Hills. And when I accepted the studio manager position, the area leader, who was my supervisor at the time, she was like, yeah, so you got your hands full with this studio. This studio is known as the black hole where instructors go to die. And I was like,
whoa, that's not what you want to hear. What does that even mean?
I was like, okay. And the thing is, the majority of the Black teachers taught at this studio.
Oh.
So I was like, okay, here we go with this. And so I was able to, turn this black hole where instructors go to die into this thriving and bright studio where people felt super welcome. It was like home. It was like known as the chill studio. And I was just like, I couldn't believe that she said that to me.
Well, what do you think? I don't know. How do we know what she meant? But do you think it was because there was like lower attendance there, or?
It was. So it wasn't in like an area like a Buckhead, Ponce City market area where that was like the cool hip area. Yeah. It was more in an area where it was like college students around. So it was around Emory University. And it wasn't in like a hip area like Buckhead or Ponce City market or even Midtown. And so I don't know if she meant it that way, or I don't know if she meant it where the instructors, where the morale was just low. I'm not really sure if she just meant it because it was a lot of people of color over on that side, on the north side. I'm not really sure. I was just like, I was prepared, and ready just to go in and do the work.
Yeah, even if we're like give her the benefit of the doubt, it was a bad choice of words.
Terrible, terrible, terrible choice of words.
all,
It was
all right,
terrible.
but you took it upon yourself, and I sometimes think that smaller, less like I don't know, prominent location is ripe for like deeper communities. Sometimes, like not as big a classes, sometimes can actually be more sustainable if you get really diehard regulars coming in. You know.
People loved that space. They would come in and literally, I was like, okay, y'all don't have to go home, but it's time for us to go. We have to go. Like it was like where people were like hanging out and having a good time. It was like a real community and family there. I knew everybody who came through the door. Everyone knew who I was, and it wasn't like, if you go to another location where they couldn't even tell you your name or, didn't know who you were from a can of paint. But I knew everyone that kind of came in the space, and it was like a family. Instructors too, like they felt the support from me. I felt the support from them. Anything that I asked them to do, they were all on board, and it was a true family at that location.
And at that time, you were the manager, right? You were in studio assistant. You were running that show.
Yeah, I was running that show. And
so how much, like, I don't know, oversight did you have? Like somebody over your shoulder micromanaging you, or did you get freedom to do what you needed to do and what you wanted to do?
At first, first year, I would say, my area leader is, the person, my supervisor was very, very micromanaging and would just be, into everything that I did, just every single email, every idea I had, and it was so frustrating, because this particular area leader was best friends with the other managers at the other studios. And, she and I didn't have that relationship at all. It was work, and that was it. It wasn't, we're not hanging out after work. It was, I'm not coming over to your house. It wasn't, so she had that relationship with the other manager. I think she was actually living with another manager, which was like super conflict of interest right there. I didn't even know how that was even a thing, but it was a lot of favoritism, and I just, and it was very obvious. And the instructors would come to me and, they would say, I don't know how you do it. We see the favoritism, and we know that how, she treats the other managers versus how she treats you. And I'm just like, at the time she would come to my location once a week to, we would have our one-on-one meetings, and it was like every time that she would come to the studio, me and my assistant time would just be so stressed out. We'd be like, oh my God, she's coming today. Like, let's do this, let's do that. And then, the day will be over and she can go back to the other locations. Like, that's how it was when she came in. It was just so much pressure. It was not a good environment at all.
And I mean, how was the center doing? Like you got to see the numbers, because sometimes that's what it comes down to. It's like, is your numbers doing okay from the central office? They just want to know, like, are you paying the rent and stuff?
So I wasn't directly paying the rent, but we had this thing that came out every Monday or Tuesday, and it was called the Dristy Dashboard. And this was just something that kind of showed your metrics of how the studio was doing, and, the number of members that you take, how your retail was doing, where your revenue was. And, initially when I started, the numbers at this location, they weren't great. And so with me being in my role, I was able to grow the studio, grow the number of people enrolling for teacher trainings, grow the instructor base, and of course, grow the revenue. So, yeah.
See, because that's what I was asking about. Because if you're, what did you call it? The Drishti Dashboard?
It's what it was called, yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a little weird. But the Drishti Dashboard, if your numbers were good on the Drishti Dashboard, then there's no reason why they should be giving you a hard time. You know what I mean?
Yes. And it was like the studio wasn't like the top performing studios, but that the studio put up numbers. It wasn't the studio that was like failing all the time, but we were putting up numbers, especially, Corepower is really big on, enrolling people for teacher trainings. And so, so I was enrolling people for teacher trainings and, selling all this retail. And North Druid Hills was in a very unique spot. It wasn't, it was in like this college town, and, they had all these college students, and it wasn't in like this glamorous location next to all these really cool things. So it was like always like a constant battle to try to, get this dashboard to look a certain way.
I know, but see, that to me, when I hear like you started at a place and you got all those numbers to go up, even if it's just like an upward trajectory, like even if it's going up and not down, then I think that from like a pure business standpoint, it doesn't make sense that you wouldn't feel supported. And if you weren't feeling supported, then it's just power trip stuff,
Absolutely.
Just someone throwing their weight around.
I think so. And it was oftentimes, that I just wouldn't, I wouldn't be pushed around a whole lot. And I would speak up for what is right and what is not, what is not right. And I always supported my teachers with everything. And so if something didn't sit well with me and didn't sit well with them, of course I'd speak up to it. And I don't think at the time the area leader was used to people speaking up to her because everyone else was her friend. And so when I came in and I was just like, hey, this isn't right. Or I would say, why are we doing this? Because I always want to know the why behind anything that you're asking me to do. I always need to know what's the why behind it. And so when I was asking these questions, it was just like, I said that, I had an attitude problem, or I was known as the angry Black woman, or I was, insubordinate because I would ask questions.
Were there any other Black people in management besides you?
No, I was the only Black manager.
Wow. And that's like across the whole...
across all 5 studios.
Wow.
My assistant, he was Black. So it was me and him on a team.
Wow. All right. So what happens when you push back on them? Like, what kind of reactions did you get for that? Like, did you get into trouble?
I felt like I was always in some kind of trouble, or I would always get called to some kind of meeting or have some kind of call, or it was always something, or I would try to address my issues that I felt with HR and it would fall on deaf ears or get swept under the rug. It wasn't until a white instructor reached out and spoke up for me that they started to listen. And that's when I was starting to get these calls from HR and get these visits from HR. And they were wondering what's happening in Atlanta. We should make a trip to Atlanta to see what's going on.
So wait a second. First of all, before we get to that turn that happened, I'm just curious to flesh out more, like, what were the kinds of issues that you were raising that they weren't responding to? What were the sort of things that you saw happening that you felt could be corrected that were problems?
Yeah, so it was always being micromanaged and favoritism for me, and just the passive aggressive behavior and microaggressions is what I was experiencing. And I would point this out of, you would treat one manager or address one manager one way, but it'd be something different for me. Or, for example, it was one manager who would bring in a physical therapist or a chiropractor to talk about anatomy. And at the time, the partner who I was dating was a doctor of physical therapy, and I would have her come in and give a lecture, but then I got wrote up for stuff like that. So it was examples like that where you would show favoritism to one person, but not, or some manager didn't get some work done during this amount of time when this was the deadline, but then I would get all my work done and it would be no consequences for this manager. It just wasn't the same. And I was just like, I just want to be treated the same like everyone else.
And you'd think the whole idea behind having a big structure like that, a corporate structure, is that it is supposed to have like more set protocols. Like it's supposed to be like everybody gets this follows the same rules, right?
Absolutely. You would think, yes.
Yeah. Because that's the difference. Like when you're in an independent place, you are often at the whims of the personality of that owner, and like whether or not they're a good communicator or not. But when you have a corporate structure, there's supposed to be like HR and like policies in place. Did you go through like proper channels? Like I'm sure they have like HR officers and stuff like that, right?
Absolutely. There's a place on Corepower's website where you can report things anonymously. I tried doing that. I've reached out to HR and reported things directly to them. And they would just come back with, well, you all should just treat each other nice and be respectful to one another. And this should have happened. And we apologize and we hear you and we're sorry. And then be swept under the rug. I would keep and I know they have records of me just constantly giving them information on how I was being treated and how other people were being treated. And it was nothing. It was no kind of results or anything.
And do you think that, if they had responded well, what sort of things do you think you would think that they would do? Is it really just about making sure certain people who are behaving this way stop behaving that way by establishing better behavioral protocols? I mean, it seems to be about the ways that these managers were relating. Like you said, there's consequences for one teacher for something, but not for another for the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
How do you address that? Is it just about making sure the managers are better policed in that regard or something? I don't know.
Well, I think it kind of started from I always say it would start from the top. From our area leader, just being fair across the board, and then it would trickle down into the managers. And so when we saw this behavior from this particular area leader, of course, no one really had the most respect for her because she was always just kind of all over the place with her leadership, and it all comes down to being a good leader. Mm-hmm. And I didn't think at the time that she was the greatest leader, especially for me. Mm-hmm. And I would do everything I could to try to make our relationship, our working relationship work. And, we would sit down and try to talk this out. And, and I was just does she need more training? I'm not sure what the problem is on how she leads. And so I think they took that sometimes, and then they took some feedback, not just from me, but from other managers. And they ended up actually doing an area leader training one year. So and I'm not even sure if that helped anything.
Well, I mean, I guess it does come down to leadership, right? The way mm-hmm. people lead, and somebody at the top setting the tone and kind of making it clear that this is the way people get treated here.
Yes.
All right. So how long did that go on? And then you had said something about it wasn't until a white person stood up for you that they started to listen. So how long did this go on before it changed?
Yeah, so I was
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was in my role I was a manager for 2 years. I was in Atlanta for 2 years, and I was about a year and a half into being a manager, and there was another instructor who also wasn't, seeing eye to eye with this exact same area leader. Now, there had been plenty of situations that had been reported with this same area leader to HR, but this time, this particular instructor, sent an email and was calling HR, and I guess they finally listened when they got this email and they got these calls.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.